Do you like being crushed by giant women wielding swords? If so, understandable, and boy do I have a game for you. Moros Protocol is a gritty sci-fi roguelike, think Dead Space meets Doom, with crunchy combat, a world that is quite literally oozing atmosphere, and a persistent annoyance in a mech suit who is somehow thicker than a bowl of oatmeal after you've dropped in 2 extra scoops. Hey folks, I'm Ash, and with Moros Protocol launching soon, I dove into the demo to see what it's really packing and whether it's actually worth your time. So, how does it play? Honestly, way better than I expected. The combat in Moros Protocol is very weighty and deliberate. Once you start something, you are locked in. So if you begin feeding your pet gun in the middle of a boss combo, I hope you enjoy having your feet electrocuted because you ain't jumping until that reload is over. And you know what? I actually kind of like that. Not the electrocution. Being forced to plan ahead instead of just bunny hopping around and blasting everything is a very refreshing twist for a boomer shooter. Naturally, you would expect the rest of Moros Protocol to be just as slow and methodical, but nope. You sprint like Sonic after 6 espressos, and even your dodges are so fast I would often lose track of myself during a fight. And judging by how confused the enemies look, I think they had the exact same problem. Those things are barely able to shuffle around at the best of times, so asking them to keep up with the Flash just feels borderline cruel. To be perfectly honest, I am very torn on the whole super speed thing. It is fantastic when you're exploring and want to zip across the map, but in combat it just feels unfair. And look, I didn't think I would ever sympathize with mosquitoes, but here we are. I just think the fights would be a lot more intense if the enemies could actually box you in, instead of only ever really catching me if I Wile E. Coyote myself straight into a wall. And speaking of walls, Moros Protocol has these weird wall mouths, or at least I hope they're mouths, that you can slice open to see if they're hiding a secret path. Usually they just spew questionable fluids and damage you, but sometimes they do actually reveal treasures. We're talking extra ammo, health, or even a slot machine that perfectly demonstrates why gambling never pays off. Not that I would know anything about that. But what does pay off is scouring every arena for secrets. They're not hard to spot, but they're also very easy to miss if you're rushing since they're tucked away on ceilings, in crevices, or even behind jumping puzzles. Maybe this is how I discover I'm a kleptomaniac, but I really love this kind of stuff. Having a reason to sniff around every corner for goodies and ammo just feels great, especially since space money is so incredibly hard to come by. So I guess, even in the future, some things just never change. A big reason why it's so satisfying is that most of the secrets make you smash something to get the prize inside, like a very gooey, very meaty piñata. The sound and visuals when you crack a loot box are spot on, scratching that caveman part of my brain that really wants to hit things with a club, which is also why it stings so much that most of the environment is indestructible. You can kick all sorts of stuff at enemies. Plasma canisters, the classic explosive barrels, or even alien goo sacks, and every one of them goes off with a bang. And then, if that sets off a chain reaction of booms, I am basically in heaven. And yet, the levels just don't react to this kind of carnage. I don't need fancy animations or physics simulations, but give me something. Vaporize a crate, break a chair, just anything to sell the moment. Or in very simple terms, caveman wants smash! Thankfully, the enemies crumple way better when you hit them with a giant bonk stick. So much better in fact that I ended up role-playing a space barbarian even though I had access to plasma shotguns and futuristic SMGs. And honestly, how could I resist? It is just so incredibly satisfying to run around ambushing enemies with an axe to the face, and then slinking back into the shadows like some kind of a sped-up slasher villain. And it's not just fun, the game actively rewards you for taking these extra risks. Smacking enemies with a tentacle sword restores health and drops better loot. So if you're brave enough to wade into a swarm of mutated crewmen, you'll come out not only richer, but also healthier. And because melee hits like a truck, even bosses can get humiliated with a few well-timed swings. But what about the guns? What are we looking at there? Well, there's the usual mix of pistols and energy pew-pews, but also some much spicier toys like a plasma double-barrel shotgun and a gun that is almost certainly one end of an alien's digestive tract. And if you're wondering which end, well, that's between you and your nightmares to decide. Either way, it does great damage, so I hope you enjoy feeding your meat gun. The higher tier guns really do feel great, especially the shotgun, which has a good bit of punch to it. Though I cannot say the same for the pistols or most of the starter weapons. They are just way too piddly. It is kinda hard to get excited about going pew 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 for 3 seconds straight when even the weakest melee weapon can split enemies in half with a single heavy attack. Now I get it. It's a roguelite, so the early game gear has to be weak to make the late game toys feel like world enders. But I feel like Moros Protocol may have turned that dial maybe just a little bit too far. The good news is that the augments do pick up the slack. As you explore, you'll find upgrades for both yourself and your weapons, and they tend to swing wildly between +5 max HP snooze fests and effects that are so cool you'll honestly want to refocus your entire build around them. Take one of my favorites for example, an augment that supercharges energy weapons, but only while you're airborne. So if you want those big chunky damage numbers, you need to hop around like a caffeinated rabbit, burning through stamina and leaving yourself wide open in the process. It is fun, it is risky, and it pushes you towards slower, heavier weapons that really sync up with your jump timing. And honestly, I love power that comes at a cost, as those limitations really do a lot to keep the game feeling fresh, even very deep into a session. Unfortunately, the permanent meta progression does not have that sort of spark. Most of it boils down to uninspired junk like +1 stamina, +1 reload speed, or the legendary, unthinkable +2 health upgrade. They're so tiny and forgettable, it's like getting last year's calendar for Christmas. And yes, I am still bitter. If the devs went for something a bit more ambitious, like selectable plus-minus style upgrades that make your runs easier, harder, or just plain weirder, I think it would have elevated the whole roguelite aspect dramatically. And speaking of drama, nobody does it better than Jocaste, or however you pronounce her, one of the 2 bosses I ran into. She pops up at multiple points in the story, does something extremely suggestive, and then stabs you with a gigantic sword. And if that wasn't good enough, she also has a surprisingly fun early game boss fight. The fight is hard enough that you actually have to use your whole kit to survive, but not so brutal that you're running around in circles and just screaming. In one run, I even messed up and brought 2 energy weapons, ran out of ammo mid-fight, and ended up having to ask her some questions, which, to my surprise, actually worked. Though, to be fair, she spends half of the fight taunting you instead of killing you, so I can only imagine the rematch later is going to be a real highlight of the game. And honestly, I really hope it is, because the whole giant sword, plasma cannon, and energy wings aesthetic really gets my inner child all excited. The story sadly has the opposite effect, as honestly it's just kinda boring. You're basically an off-brand Doom guy who wakes up from cryosleep, realizes the entire ship has turned into an all-you-can-eat meat buffet, and now you have to punch your way through hordes of mutants. And that's pretty much it. The demo does tease some big reveals for later on, however, so maybe there's still some light to be found at the end of this tunnel. But honestly, I found the whole cyber dominatrix angle to be way more engaging. Joe Cast just kinda struts in, beats you up, calls you a loser, and then leaves. And you know what? That works! It's unique, it's memorable, and it makes you want to get payback, which is exactly what a good villain should do. She completely stole the show for me, so despite being on screen for a grand total of 5 minutes, I don't think I'll forget her anytime soon. And no, I don't mean because of that. So, is Moros Protocol worth your time? Honestly, yeah, at least give the demo a spin. The story didn't grab me, and the meta progression feels like it was shoehorned in at the last minute, but all of that stuff hardly matters for an action roguelite. Meanwhile, the really important stuff, the atmosphere, the combat, and the sheer satisfaction of liquefying aliens via hammer to the head, all of that stuff is rock solid. So if the full release doubles down on those strengths, and maybe gives Joe Cast more chances to bully me, I do think that Moros Protocol could very easily be a fun 15 to 20 hour ride. Thank you for watching. If you would like to see more, make sure to subscribe, like the video, ring the stupid bell, bet your favorite wall mouth, and do whatever other nonsense you gotta do these days. Thank you for sticking to the very end, and I hope you have a lovely day. Bye bye!